Hello everybody, it's Jamie from Old Shipping Lines, and welcome back to a new video in our series, Dutch on Board the Titanic. In this series, we explore the stories of the Dutch passengers and crew aboard the ill-fated liner. Today, we'll be looking at the intriguing tale of first-class passenger Miss Berthe Antonine Mayne, a woman who was incognito on board the ship with her Canadian lover. Miss Berthe Antonine Mayne was born on July 21st, 1887 in Brussels, Belgium. She grew up in a large family with 6 children, 4 daughters and 2 sons. At a young age, Berthe decided to leave home and began her independent life. She moved to 111 Fader Street, situated between Avenue Louise and Charleroi Avenue, where she quickly established herself as a successful cabaret singer in Brussels. Berthe was a determined and independent woman who earned a respectable living and socialized with members of the upper class. While some have claimed that she was more than a singer in café chantants, suggesting she might have been a courtesan with ties to high society, these allegations appear to be nothing more than unsubstantiated rumors. Berthe received numerous offers for her talents, even from Paris. Many men were captivated by this enchanting woman, both for her beauty and her voice, and she was never lacking in admirers. One of these admirers was rumored to be Fernand de Villiers, a military officer. Some accounts describe him as a Frenchman, while others suggest he was a resident of Ixelles. Records show that a man named Fernand de Villiers lived there around the turn of the century, married with a son and daughter born in 1900 and 1901, respectively. Their affair is said to have ended when de Villiers was dispatched to Congo by Belgium. As a tribute to their time together and drawn to the elegance of the name, Berthe adopted Berthe de Villiers as her stage name. Occasionally, she performed under another pseudonym inspired by his name, Bella Vieli. Using these identities, she graced the stage of the Théâtre des Folies Bergères in Paris several times. And then, on that fateful spring evening in 1912, Quigg Baxter found himself mesmerized, watching and listening to her. Quigg Baxter was a striking young man, though his charm was tempered by the loss of vision in one eye due to a hockey accident. Yet Quigg's life was far from ordinary. He was the son of James Jim Baxter, a prominent Montreal businessman who had amassed a considerable fortune. Jim Baxter's ventures were wide-ranging. He traded in diamonds and real estate, financed Canada's very first shopping arcade, the Baxter Block on St. Lawrence Boulevard in Montreal, which housed 28 shops under one roof, invested in various enterprises, and even worked as a banker. However, in 1900, Jim Baxter's empire crumbled when he was convicted of multiple offenses, including fraud, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His life came to a somber end in 1905, shortly after his release, at the age of 66. Before his imprisonment, James Baxter had safeguarded part of his fortune in banks across France, Switzerland, and Belgium. This arrangement required his widow, Hélène de Lanaudière-Chaput, who was 20 years his junior, to make regular trips to Europe to access their funds. Each year, she embarked on these journeys in the fall, spent the winter abroad, and returned to Canada in the spring. In November 1911, Hélène set off once more, this time accompanied by her youngest son, Quig, who was 24 at the time. Quig, having lost interest in his applied sciences studies at McGill University during the first trimester, decided to join his mother on her trip to Paris. There, they took up residence at the prestigious Élysée Palace Hotel. Quig had been to France and Switzerland before to play hockey. His sister, Mary Helen, joined them in Paris at the beginning of April 1912 to celebrate her 27th birthday on April 4th. They decided to return to America together on board the Titanic, aiming to impress those they left behind. After meeting at the cabaret, Quig and Berthe began a passionate affair in the utmost secrecy, whether it was to heighten the thrill of the adventure or because they wanted to marry in Canada. The fact remains that they decided to cross the Atlantic together. Berthe Mayne and the Baxter family boarded the Titanic as first-class passengers in Cherbourg, having traveled from Paris. When Berthe boarded, she listed Paris as her permanent residence. Quig, along with his mother and sister, stayed in one of the ship's most luxurious accommodations, Suite B 58 to 60. They paid £247 for the suite, a sum equivalent to over 28,000 euros today. Berthe, traveling under her stage name De Villiers, occupied Suite C90, located one deck below near the grand staircase. Her fare was £49, 10 shillings and 1 penny. The choice of Berthe's cabin was deliberate. Its location near the staircase provided convenient access to the upper-level suites and the outer deck. Additionally, her cabin was notably larger than typical single-occupancy first-class rooms, offering ample space for hosting guests. Quig often spent time near the Café Parisien, where the waiters spoke French and the musical ambiance was provided by a trio that included the French-speaking Belgian Georges Crins. Whenever he had the chance, Quig slipped away from the watchful eyes of his mother and sister to visit Berthe in her cabin. These clandestine meetings became more frequent when Mrs. Baxter succumbed to seasickness. Confined to her bed, she found every attempt to sit up triggered intense nausea and dizziness. Resting in her cabin offered her some solace, accompanied by the rhythmic hum of the ship's engines, a sound she found strangely comforting. Mary Hélène devoted herself to keeping their mother company, which proved to be a stroke of luck for Quig and Berthe. With fewer interruptions, they were free to savor their stolen moments together, making the most of their time aboard the Titanic. That was until the iceberg appeared in their path, turning their dream into a nightmare. Initially, the first-class passengers were somewhat difficult. They complained that it was disgraceful. They had paid a lot of money for a ship that was now sinking. Surely, they hadn't paid to put on such an uncomfortable life jacket, stand out in the cold on the deck, and eventually sit in one of those ridiculous lifeboats. Quigg Baxter, however, quickly understood the gravity of the situation and took charge of getting his mother and sister to safety. The task was far from simple. His mother, overwhelmed by a panic attack, resisted vehemently. Undeterred, Quig held her firmly, carried her out of their suite, up the grand staircase, and toward the lifeboats. Mary Hélène stayed close by, following her brother's lead. Together, they ensured Mrs. Baxter and Mary Hélène were safely placed aboard Lifeboat 6. Without hesitation, Quig rushed back to Berthe's suite. Berthe, still in her nightgown, quickly threw on a long wool coat, slipped into her slippers, and followed Quig up the stairs toward Lifeboat 6. "Get in," he urged. But Berthe refused to leave without him. As if that weren't enough, she suddenly remembered her jewelry, which she had left behind in her suite. Determined to retrieve it, she made a move to go back, but Quig firmly opposed the idea. He pleaded with her, doing everything he could to persuade her to board the lifeboat and forget the jewels. Their argument grew heated and caught the attention of the American socialite Margaret Tobin, better known as Molly Brown. Molly stepped in. "Leave your jewelry where it is," she shouted. "Get in that boat." To which Berthe cried out, "But I didn't even lock the door to my room." "Your steward will lock the door for you," Molly Brown reassured her. "Besides, you'll be able to return to your room soon enough. Everything will be fine." Berthe finally relented, and, to the surprise of Quig's mother and sister, Quig, along with Second Officer Charles Lightoller, helped her over the railing and into the lifeboat. Realizing he needed to explain the situation to his family, Quig turned to them and said, "Mother, Mary, this is Berthe. Take care of her." The two women were taken aback, but Quig quickly pulled a silver flask from his coat, took a deep drink, and handed it to his mother. "To keep you warm," he said. The warmth of the liquor seemed to snap her out of her shock, and she immediately scolded him for his drinking habits. Quig interrupted her gently. "Are you well, Mom?" he asked. He kissed both her and Berthe, then, with a wave, called out, "Goodbye, good hope to you all." He stepped back and watched as the lifeboat was lowered into the dark sea. Several witnesses later recalled that Berthe was in a state of shock while aboard Lifeboat 6, repeatedly calling out for her son, despite not having any children of her own. Quigg Baxter perished with the Titanic. If his body was ever recovered, it was never identified. On board the Carpathia, Mary Helene sent a telegram to her husband, Fred Douglas, in Montreal, asking him to meet them in New York on Thursday evening, April 18th, 1912. Dr. Fred Douglas and his brother-in-law, James Baxter, Mary Helene and Quig's older brother, were waiting for them that evening among the thousands of others at Pier 54 of the Cunard line. Before they could reunite, Mary Helene Baxter and Berthe Mayne had to pass through immigration services. It was there that Berthe made a curious statement. Whether due to confusion, a language barrier, or an attempt to keep her identity as hidden as possible, she told the immigration officer that her last name was de Villiers and her first name was Mayné. The three women were escorted away by Fred and James, who carefully shielded them from the press. The journalists, eager for any story they could get, were particularly interested in the Baxter family, still well known, and the mysterious woman in their company. In an effort to protect the family's reputation, Mary Helene concocted a story, claiming that Berthe was a widowed woman who had lost everything in the Titanic disaster, her husband, her fortune, and her future. On Saturday, April 20th, the Montreal Standard published a photo of Mary Helene and Berthe, along with Fred and James, hastily fleeing from journalists. The article stated that Madame de Villiers from Paris was the sole survivor of a group on a world tour and was now a guest of Mrs. Douglas in Montreal. The news of Berthe Mayne's rescue did not immediately reach Belgium, and it's likely that few, if anyone, knew she had traveled to America aboard the Titanic. Moreover, she was traveling under a pseudonym. However, on April 24th, 1912, more than a week after the disaster, a Dutch newspaper managed to publish an extensive report about her. The article contained several inaccuracies. For one, Berthe Mayne was 24, not 20. She had boarded in Cherbourg and was from Paris, not elsewhere. Additionally, Quigg Baxter was Canadian, not American. Although Berthe stated that her destination was the Windsor Hotel in Montreal, upon her arrival in New York, Helene and Mary Baxter took her to their home in Montreal. It seems likely that Berthe, perhaps even earlier, possibly on board the Carpathia, revealed her relationship with Quig. The Baxter family made sure that the affair remained private during those days. They had no intention of letting rumors about Quig's relationship with a Brussels cabaret singer surface. After a few months in Montreal, Berthe returned to Brussels and moved back into her home on Feiderstraat in Ixelles, where her mother also took up residence. On September 27, 1912, she relocated to 11 Van Oostendesstraat near the Jubelpark in Brussels. In 1913, she left for Paris to continue her career as a cabaret singer. Under the name Bella Vieli, she became a cover girl for the magazine Music Hall Illustré on March 1, 1913. Berthe, who had not lost her ability to charm men, began a relationship with the wealthy Belgian industrialist Émile Henrico, owner of the steel factory in Court Saint-Étienne, near Louvain-la-Neuve. Between 1913 and 1924, Berthe divided her time between Brussels and Paris. After 1924, she led a complicated, private life, living at various addresses across Brussels. She owned a country house in Uccle, but ultimately passed away on October 11th, 1962, at her home in Sint-Agatha-Berchem. Throughout her life as a nightclub singer and woman of leisure, Berthe, to the best of our knowledge, never spoke about her Titanic experience. Had she chosen to share it, the newspapers would undoubtedly have been filled with her story. Almost no one, perhaps not even her closest loved ones, knew the full extent of what this beautiful and successful singer had endured in 1912. Berthe could have used the Titanic tragedy to remain in the public eye, but she didn't. The memories were simply too painful, and deep down she continued to mourn the loss of her beloved Quig. In her later years, when Berthe Mayne was no longer a singer and hardly anyone remembered her past, she began telling stories about her earlier life. These were tales that her family dismissed as fantasy. One of those stories was about her time on the Titanic and her romance with Quigg Baxter. After her death, the family discovered a shoebox full of mementos in her house in Sint-Agatha-Berchem. Inside the box were items such as a Music Hall Illustré magazine, photos of Quigg Baxter, and images of the Baxter house in Montreal. Could it all have been true after all? The story of Berthe Mayne and Quigg Baxter is one of love, courage, and heartbreak. It reminds us of the human stories behind the Titanic's tragic sinking stories that continue to captivate us more than a century later. Berthe's decision to keep her Titanic experience private speaks volumes about the emotional scars left by that night. Yet, her life's mementos preserve the memory of her romance with Quig, ensuring that their story is not forgotten.
And that marks the end of a video, my friends. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now, if you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing to the channel, as that would help out the channel a lot. Now, if you have any thoughts, comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, as I absolutely love reading your comments. And please let me know in the comment section down below as well what ships you would like me to cover in the future. Now be as well sure to check out our social media pages. We are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and we also recently have a website, oldshippinglines.com, where we have articles of the ships we cover and we have book reviews as well. I think you will enjoy the website very much. Now, with that out of the way, guys, I wish you all a good night or day, wherever you are. Stay safe, stay happy, and we will see each other on the next video. Goodbye, my friends.